Hi, Tyria, and welcome to Guild Chat. I'm your host, Ruby. It is good to be back in our own home, such as it were. Thanks to everyone who worked really hard to bring us back to you guys on live stream behind the scenes. We hope you're all staying safe and having fun in game. We have a lot happening in game starting today that I want to make sure you're all aware of. We have items in the gem store for you, free living world episodes, an in-game boost to magic find XP, world versus world, and PvP reward tracks. Progress on those. Path of Fire is half price and a lot more. Guild Wars, the articles on guildwars2.com for all of the details on those, because we are celebrating Guild Wars 15th anniversary, both in Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2, and we've got Guild Wars 2 Welcome Back for players who are coming back and wanting to catch up. So that you guys have lots to do and have lots of fun. Today we're talking about Guild Wars 15th anniversary. It has been 15 years since we launched the game. So we're talking to some of the Guild Wars developers who there way back when and are still working on Tyria today. We want to thank you all for spending all of those years with us and talk about those years bringing Tyria to you. So why don't we have the guys introduce themselves? Joe?
Oh, good. I wasn't sure about yeah, I'm Joe Kimmis. I was a content programmer on Guild Wars 1 and a content designer on Guild Wars 2.
Matthew?
Yeah, hi, I'm Matthew Medina. For Guild Wars 1, I was a senior 3D artist, and then I transitioned into design for Guild Wars 2, and I'm now a senior content designer on Guild Wars 2.
Awesome. Andrew?
I'm Andrew Gray. I actually started out doing the screenshots on the back of the box for Guild Wars Prophecies, and then I made the transition into design, and now I'm the content design lead for Guild Wars 2.
And you also share a birthday with Guild Wars. That is,
I do.
That is incredibly extra. I mean, that is really above and beyond, but you do you.
Yeah, it was nice because there was always a really special celebration in the office on my birthday, so that worked out.
Happy birthday.
Cake and everything. Well, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
I forgot that you did the picture for the box.
Yeah, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, well, why don't we start by talking, why don't I have you guys talk about some of your early memories at arena? What was it like way back in the beginning? And I don't care who goes first.
I'll
Andrew.
start. All right. We can
No,
go.
I think Matthew is the furthest one back. You should start.
That's what
I'm the dinosaur.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I will say, like, seeing the genesis of this franchise from the beginning, it was incredibly special time in my career. We're a very small, sort of scrappy studio. When I started, I believe I was the 12th employee from that big first hiring push, and there were about 20 of us at the start, all packed into two rooms together. It was Mo, Jeff, and Pat were all sitting with us, the founders of ArenaNet. We had sort of art in one room and programming design were in another room. And so it was just this very small, very ambitious sort of start to the company. Like we had the walls, even at that time, filled with artwork, maps, creature designs. Everything was sort of in our minds and on paper, but we just didn't really have it all together yet. We were still in the very early process of putting it all together. So it was this very small, really agile group of developers, and we constantly talked to each other. We constantly played the game twice a week at 7:00 every I think Wednesday and Friday, I believe. We stayed after, and we all just loved playing the game together. It was just how we started. We just continued to iterate on that, whatever we discovered in the play sessions during those first, we call them all calls. We would then go and work on for that week and just continue from the very beginning. We kept iterating on a very constant basis, and then we just kept growing and growing, and we outgrew that original space. We moved into another larger space within the same office park, but then we quickly grew out of that, and we ended up in the big building that we're in now. But yeah, I just seeing how big it's gotten from those early days is truly humbling to think about how much, just because of the incredible support and love we've gotten from players in our community. Because without you guys, we wouldn't have had a game. Whenever you build a game, you're taking a risk that somebody else is going to like what you're creating, and I think we've had players who enjoy the world of Tyria, and hopefully we'll be here for another 15 at least.
Can I ask, excuse me, can I ask about some of the specifics? Do you remember what art was on the walls? That's always interesting to me.
Yeah,
Is there any that stands out in particular?
We had there was one mission that we had very early on that we all were sort of gravitating towards. Like we didn't really have what we called a vertical slice yet, but we had at least a prototype of a mission that we thought was the one that had the most legs, and it was called the Iron Witch, and it was this. It was just a trip up into the mountains to deal with this witch who was, causing trouble, and your party was sent up there to eliminate her. Back then, we didn't have a whole lot of story development yet, really, missions with goals, and so that was the one that we had a huge map plotted out. We had all kinds of concepts for her. I wish I had some of them. I don't know whatever to some of those things. I have some of the original napkin sketches, but I don't think they'd be worth sharing. So yeah, I don't know. Were you looking for something more specific for?
Totally curiosity at heart. I was
Okay.
wondering what stood out. But I will ask you about those napkin sketches later.
All right, cool.
Because those are always more fascinating than you would think. I don't
All
know.
right.
Andrew, Joe, what about you guys? Not napkin
Yeah,
sketches. What were some of your early memories?
Yeah, you do not want to see any of my art, trust me. So like kind of going off of what Matthew was saying, like one of my earlier memories was also those like 7 p.m. all calls that we had. Like was it every day or 2 days a week? I can't remember, but like I was actually an alpha tester before I started working in that. Like I like on my 18th birthday, I was like, okay guys, let me in now. So like I definitely remember those early days. And it's funny because like for the longest time, like even working on the game, I didn't even necessarily know the order that the missions went in. It was sort of later on that the sort of like flow of the actual golden path became apparent with the actual like main storyline. And there are like some things that ended up in the game that were in totally different places. Point like Rotscale, the bone dragon. That dragon was in the Shiver Peaks at one point. It was down in the swamp at another point. Like it just sort of bounced around, but that one creature persisted pretty much from the earliest days I can remember. But then I remember some of the earlier things. Like I actually got into the alpha test shortly before we had sort of a major revamp to our artwork style. I don't know if people have seen like the early screenshots of Guild Wars 1. It looks significantly different than the game that shipped. And so like seeing those early days with like the bone armor and the stuff like that, where it was a little bit more like cartoony graphics, and then seeing that slow evolution to the sort of like more realistic, slightly grittier look, that really sticks out as a great early memory. And like one of the biggest things that sticks out from working on Guild Wars 1 is just the pre-searing area in general. I don't know if talked about it, but pre-searing Ascalon was added pretty late in development. Previously, you just sort of started the game in post-searing Ascalon, and you had a bunch of NPCs talking to you about how beautiful this place used to be, and you could tell they missed the beauty of their old homeland, but you never experienced it. You never saw it yourself. And we added that pretty late, and it sort of helped get people invested in the world. Like we made you love the place, and then we lit it on fire because that's what we do, I guess. And I just remember the difference between the early parts of the game then and now are kind of night and day. And then just seeing how people sort of like gravitated towards that area in general, like the whole Legendary Defender of Ascalon title got added because people found a way to get to be level 20 in the tutorials, basically. At one point, I even added missions or quests to let people level up a little bit more naturally in that area. So I guess just like the evolution of the game is the thing that really sticks out in mind, and like to think about like how even late in the a significant change can be made like that sort of changes the tone of the whole franchise even.
Yeah, I did not know about pre-searing being added late in the game, and in retrospect, that I'm so glad that that happened because that sounds thinking about that without pre-searing sounds almost cruel. Like, oh man, there was this beautiful place. You can't see it, but it's gorgeous. You should have seen it. We burned it down before you got here. So thanks for getting that in there. Much appreciated. How about you, Joe?
Yeah, I was just thinking about pre-searing. So I was hired right after Factions shipped, and I played the game right when it came out, and so I experienced that firsthand, where I didn't know there was going to be a searing. Just was doing my quests and moving forward, and hanging out with Prince Rurik. Things are going great, and then things stopped going great. I'm like, oh, we're in the post-apocalypse now. All right, that was really memorable. So let's see. So right when I was hired, Factions had gone out. Everything had been fixed up with that more or less, I think, by the time I was being onboarded. So we were diving onto Nightfall. I think, shout if I'm wrong, anyone else. Factions had been developed and came out about a year after the original launch. Nightfall was the first expansion that had the we'll make this expansion in 6 months. And so right when I was hired, we were like hitting the ground running, and they were like, all right, here's the client, let's get you set up, start making some quests. And I remember jumping in and being in those new zones as they were coming together. And I had just played through Factions, and I was really excited to check out the new stuff. And I go and I'm in like the Vabi areas were coming together. You had these like majestic kind of like cityscapes and the like floating gardens that they have. Except at the time, it's like 100% populated by these water buffaloes that were placeholdered for almost every NPC. And at the time, I was kind of like, oh, is this a thing? Like, all the characters are buffaloes? No, no. We just don't have all the art yet.
Just like placeholders, and what have we got? We have water buffaloes. Just put them in there.
Yeah, I know there were Emperor Kisu was also a lot of characters in early Nightfall development. The
Well,
funniest thing for me was
okay.
early on in Nightfall development. So a little more backstory. I started playing
Uh-huh.
Prophecies. I got stuck in Post-Seer because I didn't have a very good build.
Oh,
Full
no.
disclosure, playing an Elementalist sub-warrior, wielding a sword and a shield. And I think I had several point-blank AoEs, shield skills, or whatever the warrior running skill is, so that I would sprint into combat, shield skills, start dropping point-blank AoEs, right? It'll be fine. I had
Okay.
3 points in every attribute.
Well, that's
So
diverse.
I wasn't doing really well, right?
Okay.
I wasn't optimized yet. I was figuring the game out.
Excuse me.
Um, I ended up, focusing on college, fell out of it a little, got back into it with Factions.
Mhm.
The point is, I never made it past the Shiver Peaks in Prophecies the first time.
Oh,
So I had not seen the latter half of the campaign. So during Nightfall development, all of the Cornins, the Cornin army, they were
yeah.
placeholdered as White Mantle units. And I was like, these guys are cool looking. That must be the
Oh,
final art,
no.
right? Because they're not all Emperor Kisu.
Mhm.
And I was surprised
So
when they
you
changed
just you
later.
just so you just kept getting all of these completely unfamiliar things and going, "Well, I guess this sure is a thing that they're doing. It's probably fine."
Yeah, Buffalo
Yeah.
expansion confirmed.
Okay,
The
one of you needs to get a water buffalo somewhere in some upcoming content. I don't care what it is, but make it happen, please. Just as a little shout out to Joe's water buffalo content. I would very
I
much
think
like that to happen, please.
one of the things I remember was when I was running around like for the first time and like, oh, this is the next expansion, right? And there was primitive loot that was dropping, and something dropped. I
Mhm.
killed something that dropped a spear. I'm like, all right, a spear, and I pick it up, and it's a spiked shield. Like it says it's a spear, but the art asset is one of those circular spiked shields.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
like,
yeah.
all right. I can't remember if it would let you throw it at people, but
I
it wasn't all
mean,
quite in
I
at the same time.
I guess if you throw it straight and it impales itself
You
on
get
your
like
enemy, it's a little bit of a spear.
you
Hey,
get a
Captain
spiral,
America, Meg.
you know.
Yeah, there you go. I'm trying to help you here, man. I like all your encounters with the placeholder art, and I worry that at some point people were just putting things in to mess with you.
Could have
And
been.
let's see
Could
if
have
he
been.
thinks this is real. I don't know.
Well, that was before we learned the hard lesson of don't put placeholder art that's somewhat finished because it will ship. And we've probably shipped a few accidental like, yeah, that was supposed to be a folder. And then we finally got into the habit of putting big pink squares everywhere. So it's like that is an
Oh
obvious
yeah.
mistake. We cannot ship with a big pink square. But yeah, it took us a little while to figure that one out.
Is
Super
that
Yeah. I
why
Adventure
we
remember
do
much
that?
NPCs have
later.
also they've become our go-to because Super Adventure NPCs tend to also make little like beeping noises and everything like that. So it is
Mhm.
very, very apparent when one is in your otherwise normal world.
Oh, so like the bee dog.
Yep, that's why in all the play sessions
Yep.
there's bee dogs everywhere. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. I
That
remember
explains why you come across that.
one that made it into the game that I worked on in Eye of the North. There's a part where, let's see, I think this is in Ula's story mission.
Uh-huh.
You have to fight an invulnerable golem, and it's stated a couple times that this golem is invulnerable because a couple players in an all call like fought the invulnerable golem for a while. Like it doesn't take damage, so the NPCs are now very vehement about how invulnerable the golem is. To beat it, you've got to pick up these like energy cores or something or other and drop them at its feet, and they explode, and it does damage to it, right? And it's implementing that whole section. I was like, all right, like the designer specified that there are these energy cores. You got to take them here, bring them over to the golem, drop them at its feet, they explode. And all the design says is that the golem cores can damage the golem. Like, okay, how much damage? Like, all right, placeholder number. They do 1,337 damage. That's an obvious placeholder, right? And I
Yes.
forget about it. I forget about it. And later at launch, I go over and drop a golem core, and it does 1,337 damage. And I'm like, oh, they adjusted the golem's hit points to make it take exactly 2 or 3 hits from these.
Oh, no. I like that one. Okay, so Andrew, I have you had left a note for me that I was kind of interested about that I was interested in about some of your memories about E3 in 2005ish. Can I can I ask if I remember it?
Which one?
The after
Which the
party.
one? Ah, yes, yes.
I
So I
want
want
to
it
hear
was
your stories.
yes. So it was either 2005 or 2006. We were down at E3, and we had like sort of an after party thing where they had drinks that were themed based on all the 6 professions. 5 being alcoholic beverages, the 6th one, the monk, being the only non-alcoholic beverage. So we were for a while. And then at some point, somebody realized that just like in Guild Wars 1, you could cross-class the drinks. Now, I don't know if this was intended or if some drunk person just went up there and was like, I want a warrior ranger. And the bartender was like, sure, buddy. And just, mixed a roke in a vodka ginger or whatever. But needless to say, towards the later hours of this party, people were feeling pretty good. And at some point, I'm recalling who had the bright idea of throwing Jeff Strain into the pool, as you do. Unbeknownst to any of us, Jeff and the other founders had gotten us all tickets to see Revenge of the Sith, which was really new. This is how old I am, by the way. No. And threw him into the pool with all of the tickets in his pocket. So we all show up to the theater pretty drunk with doggy movie ticket and a soaking wet founder with us. And somehow they still let us in to watch that movie.
Did you thank him?
That was the same night.
Was he mad or?
He took it in good humor. Yes.
I feel like I'm picturing this go down in my head, and he's trying to stop the Revenge of the Sith tickets in his pocket, and you're like, yeah, sure, and he goes, and he said, no, here they are.
And I have to imagine, because this is well before the days that most cell phones were waterproof. So I'm assuming if this person had any forethought, they were like, I have to find some way to make sure he doesn't have his phone in his pocket. And they probably accomplished that, not realizing that there were other potential things you don't want thrown in a pool.
Valuable.
Like, I would think your boss would be one of those things, but, for Ranger Warriors, who knows?
That's what I was going to say.
This. Go ahead.
At some point when you're trying out a bunch of different, professions, then, yeah, pool seems like a great idea.
You say this person, but everything you're saying is remarkably specific, and I'm curious as to who this person was.
It was not me. I legitimately don't remember, because I was also cross-classing all night. And I don't want to throw someone else under the bus. I have a few suspicions based on that behavior of who it might have been, but I don't want to just go around, blaming people.
That is completely fair. So as long as we're on the subject of E3, I love your cross-classing story, and I feel like cross-classing is like a metaphor for partying now. At some point, I'm just gonna hang on to that. As long as we're on E3, will you tell your E3 for everyone story too?
This one's shorter. Just that we had an event. I think this is actually the E3 before that. That we did something that people hadn't really done before, I don't think, which is basically let everybody play our game during E3. So even who couldn't go to E3 got the opportunity that people at E3 got to do, which is play new games that hadn't come out yet. So at the end of that event, we wanted to do something, as like a finale. What we settled was summoning a bunch of giant worms in Lion's Arch and slaughtering everybody, and then a nice fireworks show. But that was one of my earlier memories, because I actually took a video of that we could probably find somewhere now that I think about. But
man.
And it was right when we started getting some of the music in from Jeremy Soule, so it had some of his tracks in there and everything. It's really awesome.
Mm-hmm. So it sounded magnificent, but it just ended in death.
Yeah, pretty much. I feel like a lot of our earlier beta things ended that way. Guild Wars 2 and some of the earlier betas, we basically turned I think it was Blaze Ridge Steps into open world PvP, where we branded people and then they were branded and they would
yes. I was there for that. That was super fun.
Yeah, I remember one of my favorites from holding out at the last minute.
Joe, go.
Oh, I had practically said my whole thing, but now I'll say a little more. I remember this is a Guild Wars 2 thing, but in that beta event where we had the branded invading Blaze Ridge, and if
Mhm.
you got killed by them, you turned into a branded, and it became like right as the beta servers were turning off. I think my character was like running from this giant pack of branded, and I'm like, all right, there's no time left. Like the rest of you run, I'll hold them off. And
Aw.
I think I'm charging into this pack because I was playing a Norn Guardian in that beta
Mhm.
because I wanted to try out their cool bear form, right? So I turn into a bear and I do the bear charging in, and the servers shut down. So it was very dramatic. I think that's like, you know,
That's a good way to go out.
who knows what, right? Yeah, it's that like cut to black, and we rejoin the rest of the party, and they're like, oh no.
What happened? He died. He died the way he would have wanted to.
Right.
So, what were you saying? What was yours, Matthew?
Oh, I was just saying, similar to Andrew's story, one of the early beta events, I believe, had that sort of ending, the same ending. But in this one, we spawned in a number of. So if you're familiar with pre-Syrian, you're familiar with the character Gwen when she was a little girl.
Yeah.
And she, in pre-Syrian, she was just following you around, and she skipped around, and she was this cute little character, just a really sort of vivacious little, child.
Yeah, I loved her.
And so at the end of one of the beta events, the city just started filling up with Gwen's popping up everywhere, and she would skip through the town and do her little dance, and she'd play her flute, and all the things that Gwen did. And then at some point, she just started turning to players and said, "And now you die." And she points them, and they just started dying, and it would start raining fireballs down on everybody, and like it was another one of those like, ha ha ha, we get to have a little bit of fun because we know that none of this is permanent, and we can do kind of a little bit of trickery from us devs to the players who made because I mean really it was also a way for us to stress test the server to like what happens if we fill the city up with a bunch of effects. Like we want to see what kind of load that will cause us and get some metrics on it so we understand like what we can and can't do from a technical standpoint. But I there's a video clip out there of in particular that I often watch actually still of this. There was a guild that was doing so the necromancer in Guild Wars 1, what their dance was the thriller dance, and so they had done like this
Yeah.
synced up thriller performance where they were doing the whole thing. Then Gwen started showing up while they were doing their performance. It started nuking everybody while they were dancing, and they were recording it for posterity, and they unbeknownst to them ended up getting something even more wonderful than just a dance performance. A little
That's
piece of Guild Wars
fantastic.
history. Yeah.
Mhm. But, to what you were saying, it's great that you got to do these cool things and have fun, and, Gwen got significantly less adorable when she started murdering everybody, but you also got
Gwen
to
the
get some testing
Goremonger.
in there. Gwen the Gorger was years ahead of it. It was kind of prophetic. Um, but you also got to get some testing in, and it was practical, and it was kind of twofold. So that
Yeah.
was cool that you got to do that. Yeah. Do you guys want to talk a little bit about some of these things you worked on, especially if they're still in game today? Because one of the cool things is seeing how they've changed over the past 15 years, or 250, 300, however many you're counting.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's this is sort of following up on something that we talked about before too, pre-Syrian, and how that did come in fairly late. And I remember because one of the projects that was on my plate as a prop artist in Guild Wars 1 was the Great Northern Wall of Ascalon. I built the
Oh,
entire prop set, and we built it. Guild Wars 1 didn't have the highest system requirements because we wanted it to be as accessible to as many different players as we could make it. So we didn't have like super
yeah.
high end requirements, and so our prop sets were built very judiciously with lots of lots of considerations for mid-range machines. So they didn't have like large, huge texture sets, and we had to get really cautious about our polygon counts, and so it was a very deliberate piece to build that big of a set of props, because how do you depict a giant wall with mid-range set of textures? So that was an interesting challenge, and I was pretty proud of what we ended up shipping. Then towards the end of development, they were like, and now you need to build a perfectly intact version of it using no more textures. And I was like, oh, well, okay, how do I do that? And so that was a fun challenge to have to be given sort of in the 11th hour. But in the end, I ended up kind of refactoring a bunch of stuff, and it made both sets even better. But that's one of the things that now I still enjoy seeing in Guild Wars 2 is the ruins of the wall and climbing up on that wall. They were able to do it in a way that I could only have dreamed to be able to do it. Now it actually looks like the Great Northern Wall that I think we had initially wanted it to be in it. And I'm not slamming, the way that it looked in Guild Wars 1. I think it was fine, but it when you take a huge leap in technology from Guild Wars 1 to Guild Wars 2, you can definitely visualize it the way that, especially the way that we had amazing concept artists who were constantly pushing the envelope of like what you could and couldn't depict in a game like this. And so seeing the Guild Wars 2 version of that wall is a nice humbling thing for me to see that's still a huge landmark in our game.
Yeah, the fact that it is the cornerstone to so many things. And yeah, the difference in what we could create in 2005 versus what we can create now has got to be enormous. And just looking at it is humbling is a good word. And
yeah,
you should be super proud of that. So
Yeah,
how
I
about you
always go
guys?
back to that.
Joe? Yeah.
Is it the first mission in post-searing is the Northern Wall mission where you scout the char and then run back to the wall as they're all chasing you?
yeah.
Yes. My gosh.
That's like the iconic mission for me.
Yeah.
We added a thing with the 10th anniversary to encourage players to go back and play some of those old missions during the anniversary event. That's all I go do for the Ascalon area.
That mission has really strong memories for me. I remember that, and it seems like not a huge deal now because we've done so much as players since then, but I remember that heart pounding, am I going to make it? That was a fantastic mission. It was really, really good. So what about you, Joe and Andrew? What were some of the things that you worked on back then?
Let's see. So
Andrew. Oh.
it's too late. I'm already.
Too late, you go.
Yeah, one of the things I know I was talking about before was the Hall of Monuments was one of the big projects that I worked on during development of Eye of the North, where we had the Eye of the North, and you can walk into the hall proper where you can set up all your statues and make the additions to your various deeds and display all your most expensive weapons and armor sets.
Mm-hmm.
And on the programming team, we were building all of that, and we had put so much effort into it. There was new technology to like display your statue so that you were modeling your armor sets and having all that tracked so that it would be imported into Guild Wars 2. And at the time, we were kind of like, yeah, there'll be a thing for it, right? We've got a plan for this will all get sent up to the servers and they'll parse the data and work somehow. And over time, that came more and more together, where we have the Hall of Monuments website that shows you how many points you have and what you're getting for each point. And at the time, I think I kind of just thought, you'll log Guild Wars and you'll get all this stuff. And then on the Guild Wars 2 side, it actually became that you go back to the hall and it's all not in ruins, but like nobody's been there for 100 years sort of atmosphere.
Mm-hmm.
It's overgrown and it's starting to fall apart, and it's all very empty except for of Guild Wars 1 characters. And going in there during the Guild Wars 2 launch and seeing that area that I'd spent so much time like zoning back into and testing things and checking the statues over and over and over again, it was really incredible, like seeing it and collecting the rewards that I'd earned. It really gave me that perspective of being in this same world hundreds of years later.
Yeah. As a player, I feel like I'm like the baby of the group here. But I started playing Guild Wars 2, Joe, about when you started working on it. As a player at that point, the Hall of Monuments was a really exciting place for me, like filling it up and working so hard on it, and then seeing it in Guild Wars 2 was an emotional thing for me. Imagine it's 10 times more so with all of the work you put in on it. So A, thank you. Can I ask you to talk about the NPCs in the Hall of Monuments?
Um,
Not
let's
just
see.
that
I know
one, but like all of them.
there was kind of a tradition in the Eye of the North that, and across all of Guild Wars 1, there are a whole lot of NPCs named after various developers.
Yeah.
Eye of the North is kind of a hotbed of them, just because we started knowing that Guild Wars 2 is next. We were like, all right, let's make sure everybody's got an NPC somewhere. Something I really, really appreciate to this day is that while we were working on updates to the Hall of Monuments to make it a while after Eye of the North ship, we had to go back in as we started clarifying some of the details on here's how the calculator will work, here's the items that you're going to get in Guild Wars 2, and we had to fix up some stuff like, okay, we now know that it's going to all count stuff together to send it to Guild Wars 2, right? But some players still want to have the like individual character view of it to track, like, hey, how far is my assassin on all this stuff? Like, my assassin has these armors, my warrior doesn't. I want to be able to see what's my full composited state, right? So I added a way to toggle back and forth between here's your account view and here's your character view. And so at the time, who was just named like Joe, because I was like, I'm not a designer, I'm just going to placeholder something. And when our designer went through later, they were like, all right, we'll just rename this Chemist the Historian. And I was like, oh, hey, cool, I finally got an NPC. So that was the character who built some of the little Hall of Monuments details stuff on your account. And then my favorite thing was in Guild Wars 2, the designer who was working on that side was like, all right, well, we're going to have a as ghosts. And Chemist the Historian is, again, the character who's hanging out in the hall and he dispenses your rewards as a ghost in Guild Wars 2. So I think that's kind of unique having a this named NPC across those two games.
I like that he's there. That's extremely cool. So, well,
Yeah,
let's see.
I got
So
to
yeah,
work on.
excuse me. Go ahead.
I was saying, I got to work on the Visions of the Past episode recently on Guild Wars 2 and revisit the hall again, set up the Eye of the North NPCs again, and move all those characters around and try to remove the atmosphere of the hall the way it was. So that was also really fun. So yeah, I worked on a couple iterations of it now.
Yeah, it's nice that it's persisted all of this time. Excuse me. And the North and the Hall of Monuments, that all of those, so many of those are developers, is a cool thing that it's good to see persist that long. hang in there. So thank you for your work on that. Speaking of Eye of the North, Andrew, can I ask you to talk a little bit about Logan Thackeray and his ancestry.
Yeah. So actually, me and Joe and Lindsay, who wasn't able to make it today, we all worked on some of the Guild Wars Beyond content that sort of planted the seeds for Gwen and Kieran Thackeray's romance that eventually led to Logan Thackeray existing. So that was cool. Like, I worked on the Hearts of the North content, so did Joe. That sort of really cemented them. Like, I spawned their wedding. Joe did all the for that. So yeah, that's definitely something cool that's persisted. I'd say beyond that, probably my favorite thing that's persisted across game is the Palawa Joko King Thorn rivalry. I kind of took that to 11 with some of the content beyond Halloween content that we did. So when Palawa Joko came back as a character in Guild Wars 2, it was great to see that actually Joe, who works on the festival content for Guild Wars 2, sort of kept that like bad blood two of them going, which is great.
It's one of the oldest stories, right? Like, apparently dating back to far before the player characters were saving the world, these two were bitter enemies. I think on Guild Wars 1 that was just we were like, all right, like, let's add some more Halloween quests this year. Like, what do we got? Do we want to do some stuff that's kind of Nightfall related? And we were just like, you know what? Like, I guess if there's two undead kings, they must hate each other, right?
Sure, like,
and just kind of all spun out of that. It's like, what does Palawa Joko think about Mad King Thorns? Like, they must really get on each other's nerves.
Yeah, but I remember making a piece of content that took place in one of the Underworld maps, because this is well after we actually had map support on Guild Wars 1. So we just like, what map is and they just hurled insults back and forth to each other. It was pretty great.
Yeah, that is a classic map. What is it?
Scarred Psyche is the name of it.
Scarred Psyche. There we go. Yeah. I knew it was something good.
Yeah,
we put a lot of effort into that for a random holiday quest.
Yes.
So here's one of my favorite random stories about the game that happened because of that. So Mad King Thorn in that mission in Scarred Psyche has incredible skill bar where, because he's the king, he's running 8 elite skills. He doesn't care. There's no rules. And he has all custom skills. Maybe he's got like Giant Stomp in there just for fun. But one thing he does, which I love, is his heal. Your goal in the mission is to protect him. So if he dies, you lose. He has a self heal that is a really large AOE steal. Like, he will take half of your health to keep himself alive.
It's a confused life, but involuntary.
Yeah. But you don't want him to die, so really he's just coming out. But the thing I love the most is we had this running story in Halloween quests about Mad King Thorn's invisible pony, Mr. Gumdrops. In a much earlier quest point where one of his retainers is like, all right, I'm sending you to go to this quest because I have to go groom the Mad King's invisible pony. And you're like, yes, he certainly is mad. He's telling you he has an invisible pony. Then the next year, at some point, we're like, yeah, let's have a quest where you have to go save the invisible pony. Why not? It's canonical now. There is an invisible pony. It's not a figment of his imagination. And so, as things do, that kind of spiraled out of control. Eventually, in Scarred Psyche, the Mad King has a skill to summon his invisible pony to aid him in combat. And so expect you cannot see the invisible pony. It's invisible. And this triggered in-player discussions some of the strangest bug reports I've ever, such as the invisible pony doesn't seem to have a model. Is this a bug? And like we were reading these reports and we're like, they just don't. Maybe we were too subtle calling it the invisible pony. And there was also on our incredible player wiki, there was a very brief, frustrated discussion about how do we properly document the invisible pony, because somebody posts a screenshot and they're like, here's a screenshot of the invisible pony in game, and somebody's like, this is a screenshot of a rock. And they're like, well, you can't see the invisible pony. And they're like, its nameplate in there so that you can tell if the invisible pony is there. Like, well, normally for our screenshots we don't have the nameplates. So they eventually figured out a plan for properly documenting the creature. But yeah, so that was quite an adventure building all of that.
Ruby's broken.
Oh no.
All right. Yeah, it sounds like Ruby's having some, so she's going to work on that. And I don't know, Matthew, you want to talk about something for a bit?
Yeah, sure. So I will say I don't remember the pony. I on Guild Wars 1, I was really not super keyed in on story and narrative as much as I became once I moved into design. But I definitely got into the weeds on a number of areas, one being alphabets, languages. We initially didn't have any sort of plan to have a readable or translatable language. We had a bunch of and there was, sort of these symbols that were put on for various reasons, just to make it look like there was writing in the world, but we didn't actually make an attempt to do anything about it. And then eventually, after talking to Jeff Grubb and Sean Sharp and a couple of other folks, they were like, well, if somebody on the art team wants to take a stab at like making an alphabet, we'll support it. So I was like, well, yeah, I'm a huge, language nerd on some levels. So I was very enthused about the possibility, and I put together. I actually took one of the languages that was already in the game, and I just adapted it. So instead of being Irish, I started to actually mold it into a simple, one-for-one translation of English to what we ended up just calling the common language, and then eventually became Crichton once we moved it into Guild Wars. But for Guild Wars 1, we basically just had a couple different alphabets that we used for various things. And with Eye of the North, I think it was the first time we started using Asuran. So they come in over time. But I was super enthused about that. It's one of those things that is a pet project. That's another thing that I'm happy to see continue to be supported. And someday maybe I'll put another language in if I can convince enough folks that we want to do that.
Okay, I think we actually fixed our audio issues, and thank you, Matthew, for covering
Awesome.
me.
Yeah.
Welcome to trying to figure all of this out from, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, we are getting a little bit to the end of our hour, but I would like to ask if each of you guys could give one more memory about early things that you worked on in Guild Wars 1 that are still in the game today. A place or a thing or a person. Everybody's
I
thinking so
worked
hard.
on so this is kind of
More
a
incredible.
reverse. This is the probably one of the only situations where something in Guild Wars led to something in Guild 1. We had the April Fool's fake announcement of the commando
Oh yeah.
profession, and after we announced that for Guild Wars 2, Horiadoshu was like, "Hey, we could import the commando model to Guild Wars 1 if you guys think you could do anything for it." So we ended up making a time travel quest where you go back in time with a time traveling commando who Slen's mother, Sarah, from a time traveling robot. That may sound familiar to you.
But not
We
too
continued
familiar.
that. Yes, not too familiar, no. That was the Annihilator quest, and then Annihilator 2 was added the next year. And then years later, when we were working on High Bluffs, which was a map where the very fabric of reality was falling apart due to Kraukator shenanigans, there is a very, very low chance that probably ended up being a higher than it should have been chance for a commando to pop out of a mist rift, say, "We're in the wrong place," and then pop into another rift and rapidly disappear.
That's fantastic. That is so good.
The Annihilator
So
quest was really like the apex of Guild Wars 1 quest design. We had a lot of specialized technology to make that quest work.
Mhm.
We didn't really have as much of like transforming the character or having the character much less having the character throw grenades. So there were a lot of experimental things that we did to make that happen.
It seems to have worked out well.
We got 2
So
years
the
of
commander
out of it.
popping no, that's okay. Commander popping Guild Wars 1 on April Fool's Day with the helicopter showing up. I was not here yet. I was working on the press side. And I remember watching Joe yelling in map chat about that. So Joe, you made a huge impression. Thank you. That was awesome. So how about you two?
Let's see. I was trying to think of something as early as I could, but I'll probably talk a little more here about Palawa Joko, because when we were working on Nightfall, I think his quests and involving him out in the is it the Desolation? So there's the Crystal Desert, then the Desolation, and then anyway, that was one of the later things we were working on. I was initially working on quests. We were doing, I think, Bobby and then Korna. And he wasn't like a super pivotal character in the game's storyline. Like, he's important, but being evil overlord, he's not actually the main villain. And setting all of his quests and stuff up in Nightfall was just, it was such a strange experience, because I kept asking the designers, like, so are we going to fight this guy? They're like you work together with him and he kind of helps you out because the fate of the world is at stake, and he lives there too. And it ended up being like such an interesting and funny character where you work with him out of necessity. He's telling you pretty much the whole time, like, yeah, like, I'm probably going to go back to conquering the world after this, but I know that you are on this like god-slaying adventure, and if I actually provoked you into fighting me, that'd probably end up bad for me. So I'm just gonna hang out here and give you quests. Like, he's very he was a very canny character that way, and I liked seeing both that he made it, like, that plan worked for him. He made it all the way to Guild Wars 2, and then kind of the payoff where the people of Guild Wars 2 have to live with some of those consequences.
Yeah, that's not always great, but we try.
I hear
You,
delicious
Matthew.
Yeah, so the only other one that I know is really special to me is I was able to work on the Temple of Ascension the end of Guild Wars, not but at the point in which you are sort of needing to move into another level. You get to level 20 and you have to ascend to be able to see spirits and move on to battle the Titans later. But there's that pivotal moment where you have to fight your doppelganger inside the Temple of Ascension, and that was the biggest prop with the most assets I had been asked to build prophecies. And I had to work directly, not had to, but I was given the assignment and worked really hand in hand with Daniel Dochu, our art director, on the look. And we got really into what this would look like and how would the gods have built architecture, or how would architecture inspired by the gods look. We were still not quite there at building some of the mist maps, so this was the first sort of prototype for what that stuff would look like. So I worked directly with him on that stuff. We got really into the weeds in terms of like, I was always a super nerd on anything I did, and so I was sending him links about Go and how everything in nature and art is using this sequence of numbers that I won't bore you with here, but if you want to, you can look it up. The Fibonacci sequence is a big thing in art, where a lot of the old masters tried to sort of represent that. And so we put a lot of that into the design of that prop set. And so then obviously we didn't have Ilona Noble until we got to Path of Fire in Guild Wars 2. But being able to see that resurrected and that we get to go inside it again and see how the artists had reinterpreted it and re-envisioned it, and how close it came to the design was another thing that was just like, my gosh, I can't believe that we are still here and we get to see this incredible place. Of course, it's all branded up now and walled off, but when that does open up and you get to explore inside the Ascension, I just love hanging out in there. And love that the designers ended up hooking up that really amazing collection of the Flameseeker Prophecy. Spend a lot of time in there. It's open.
That's awesome. Thank you, Matthew. And
Yeah.
thanks all of you for the past 15 years. This has been fantastic. And Matthew, I think you said it best, to another at least 15. And
yeah,
hopefully more. So thank you. Thanks all of you. Happy birthday, Andrew. Happy birthday, Guild
Thank
Wars. Thanks
Happy.
all of you guys for hanging out with us. What words would you three like to leave with us?
Yeah, well, thanks everyone for watching. I hope everyone has the chance to go check out the 15th anniversary content in Guild Wars 1 and Guild Wars 2. And
Yeah, thanks for playing. Make sure to go get your free cape and stay safe
Oh, yeah.
out there.
Yeah, I would just say thank you guys for an amazing 15 years of support, and this game and all of us wouldn't be doing what we do without all of you guys playing the game with us and giving us your feedback and telling us what you love, what you don't. It's an amazing experience to be able to work on this and build this world with you guys. So thank you very much for that. Happy birthday, Guild Wars. Hope you all enjoy your free stuff in game, and we will see you some other time.
Yeah, guys, very much. Stay safe. We appreciate you so much, and we will see you next time.